Okay, programming fans, here's a short primer for building your stats class. Let's start with a quick review of a class. First of all, we have a header file called stats.h. It has private attributes or private data parts, which are the attributes of the object. That's what makes it an object. In our case, we have an original list and a sorted list, as well as a length and a high count. Length is the vector length or the number of data in the list. High count will be the frequency of the mode. The user will never see or have access to the private data. Stats.h also has a public section. These are the functions that define everything we can do to our object. In this case, the functions tell us all of the derived information we can get from our list. The public functions are what the user can see and use. Okay, now we're ready for the implementation file or body of the class, in this case stats.cpp. You'll see a slightly different syntax when you start writing functions. For example, we will add stats : to every function name so that it will remember it's part of the stats class. The functions use private variables or whatever information is sent to that function. You can also call a function of the class from within the class if needed. We'll take a look at that later on when we show you an example for standard deviation. Okay, let's find out how you can build your stats class one function at a time with an example. You will need these files: stats5b.cpp, stats.h, stats.cpp, and teststats.cpp. These are all located in the group folder on the server under the comp.sci folder. Stats5b.cpp is a standalone working stats program using vectors. It's not yet in a class format. We will use the functions that we know work in our stats.cpp program. Stats.h is the stats class header, stats.cpp is the stats class body or implementation file, and teststats.cpp represents any user program that might call up and use our stats object. Now, let's see how this is done by building a standard deviation function. Our step 1 would be to add the following public function to stats.h. Copy the find standard deviation prototype from stats5b.cpp into stats.cpp. Then change the prototype as follows. First, instead of calling it find standard deviation, let's abbreviate it to make it easier for the user and just simply call it SD, where S and D are capitalized. Then, remember, we no longer have to send a vector of floats called statslist to the function because we'll be using the original list, which already resides in the private variable section of stats.h. Now we're ready for step 2, actually adding the function to the stats.cpp. Again, copy the function definition at the bottom of stats5b.cpp and paste it into stats.cpp. This is the function as it appears in the program stats5b.cpp. Now we'll make some modifications. We will adapt it to work in our class. First, we will add stats : to the function name so that it will know it's a member of the stats class. Also note that we changed standard deviation to SD and we took out the need for the stats list being sent to the function. If you notice, we kept our variable standard deviation and made it equal to the square root of whatever came back from the variance function in our class. In other words, we're simply calling up the variance function inside stats.cpp. And finally, we're ready to return that value. Step 3 of building our standard deviation function is to test it and make sure it's working. And this is very straightforward. You'll simply add a cout statement for standard deviation, and you'll call for the value by using mylist.sd, just like we did mylist how many, and so on. Now here are some hints that you'll have to pay attention to as you work your way through this. Stats5b.cpp uses a list called statslist. The private variable for the same list idea in our class is called original list. You'll also have to look at the spelling of sorted list in several of the functions to make sure it matches. So make these updates when you copy and paste into the stats.cpp as necessary. The stats class private variable for how many is length. Change it as needed when you paste your functions into stats.cpp. Use the original list for mean through sample standard deviation, and use sorted list for median through outliers and mode. Now, only add one function at a time, debug it, test it, and when it works, move on to the next function. You should have this done in no time. You should be able to complete your stats class in very short order.